All right. You've all heard the old joke, I'm sure. What's the difference between ignorance and apathy? What's the answer? I don't know, and I don't care. All right. So it's a funny joke because it's ironic, right? But the truth of the matter, apathy is really not funny. A woman by the name of Kitty Genovese is the poster child really for why apathy is not funny. Genovese was attacked outside the front door of her apartment complex. One of her neighbors heard the commotion, poked his head out the window and yelled at the attacker, scaring the attacker away, but nothing more was done to help the wounded woman. Listen to this. About a half hour later, her attacker returned to find her still lying helplessly on the ground right outside the front door of her apartment, and her attacker raped and killed her a half hour later. All right, now listen to this. Investigators would later discover that 37 other neighbors had heard Miss Genovese screaming for help, and not one of them chose to do anything. That's disturbing, isn't it? Apathy is really not funny. And so this morning we're talking about victory over apathy and complacency as part of our ongoing Victory Message series. But since giving this particular message, this title of Victory over Complacency, or Apathy and Complacency, I've become convinced that complacency is probably not the most common companion to apathy in the United States, in our culture. In the opening joke, ignorance and apathy together say, I don't know and I don't care. All right? Complacency and apathy together say, listen, I'm okay, so I don't care. Everything's fine with me, so I don't care about you. I think that's common, but I think more common today, I would argue, is angry apathy. Angry apathy says, I am really mad about it, but I'm not going to do anything about it. As a matter of fact, I read an interesting article this week that described our emerging cultural apathy with the words smug condemnation. Say smug condemnation. Smug condemnation says, well, listen, I know how things are supposed to be better than the rest of the idiots, but I'm still not going to do anything about it. I look down on what everyone else is doing because they're not doing it right, but I am still not going to do anything about it. Well, in contrast to all these various cultural companions that go along with apathy, the cross of Jesus Christ says, you know what? Here's the truth. Things that are broken on planet Earth matter. They matter to God, and they matter to the point of showing up. Things that are broken on earth mattered enough to God that he showed up to do something about it. Jesus himself told us exactly what he showed up to do in Luke 4:18 through 19. This is what he described his ministry as. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bring good news to the poor. That's something that's broken. To proclaim that captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and that the time of the Lord's favor, that the time of the Lord's grace has invaded the brokenness of the human condition. That is Jesus' mission on earth. And so broken things matter to Jesus. It mattered to the point of showing up, and it mattered to the point of self-sacrifice. Broken things matter to God to the point of self-sacrifice. Jesus gave his life to fix broken things on planet Earth. And so Jesus' life mission was to bring the perfections and the wholeness and the salvation and the healing of heaven, the perfections of heaven, and to bring it to the brokenness of planet Earth. Broken things matter to God. And Jesus, by the way, commissioned you and me. He commissioned his followers to continue doing his work. And so the cross of Christ says to you, The cross of Christ says to me, the cross of Christ says to us, the brokenness of the human condition still matters. The cross of Christ says awareness of what's going on, not ignorance. The cross of Christ says concern instead of complacency. The cross of Christ says compassion instead of smug condemnation, responsiveness instead of apathy, and action instead of just mere anger. Right? And the cross of Christ says to you, and it says to me, the brokenness of the human condition matters to the point of self-sacrifice. Right? The cross says broken things in this world are worth giving your life for. Broken things on this planet are worth giving your life for. And so the question I want to answer this morning, or look at what the Bible has to say, is how do we live lives then of concern and responsiveness to the things that are broken in the world around us, as opposed to living lives of apathy and complacency? And so what I'm going to look at is one of my favorite Bible characters, a good example of concern and responsiveness. It's this really obscure guy named Shammah. And in 2 Samuel 23, here's what we read about Shammah. Next in rank was Shammah, the son of Agi from Harar. That's a mouthful. Don't want to say that 10 times fast. But one time the Philistines, and so let's just think of the Philistines as the enemies of God's purposes, the enemies of God's plans, the enemy of God's perfections. These were oppressors, murderers, and pillagers and marauders, all right? So they're pushing forth brokenness on planet Earth. And so we're going to spiritualize them. So one time the Philistines gathered at Lehi and attacked the Israelites in a field full of lentils. Say bean field. Bean field. And the Israelite army fled. The people of God hightailed it out of there. But Shammah held his ground in the middle of the bean field, and he beat back the Philistines. And so the Lord brought about a great victory. All right, so here's the first step of victory over apathy and complacency that we learned from our good buddy Shammah. Find your bean field. Say that with me. Find your bean field. And so let's personalize it. Find my bean field. All right, we see it right here. All right, so the Philistines gathered at Lehi, or Lehi, or however it's pronounced, and attacked the Israelites in a bean field. Everybody else fled, but Shammah held his ground in the middle of the bean field, and he beat back oppression and injustice in the kingdom of darkness on planet Earth. Shammah found his bean field. All right, now why a bean field? All right, listen to this. It's doubtful that the bean field had any strategic military value, right? It's doubtful that this was a political hub. I don't think the king had his throne in the middle of the bean field. I don't think this was a strategic, economic, or political hub. It was just a bean field. But Shammah saw oppression and injustice and things of the kingdom of Garden, right, finding a foothold on planet Earth. He was unwilling to let the rule of God's kingdom, the rule of God's peace and healing and salvation be usurped even in the middle of a bean field. And Shammah said, not here, not on my watch, not even in a bean field, not even on my watch. All right, the world desperately needs some Shammahs today. People who find their bean fields, people who find the place where the enemy is got people in bondage and brokenness, and he's got them stuck there under his thumb. People who see that happening on planet Earth and will say, not even here. Not on my watch. The world desperately needs Shemas today. And so here's the first application, family. Find your bean field. Find a place where the devil's winning and bring the kingdom of God. Got it? All right, let me make a quick, just kind of secondary or ancillary point that we learn from Shema about bean fields. We need to know the difference between beans and Philistines. Shema held his ground in the middle of the bean field, and he beat back the Philistines. He defended the field and he beat back the Philistines. We need to know the difference between the two. Now that may seem like an obvious point, but I'll tell you what, there are a lot of Christians who spend a lot of time ignoring Philistines and whacking beans. Except when they're doing that, they're not actually ignoring Philistines. They're effectively being Philistines. Right? You hear me? Right? Know the difference between beans and Philistines. Right? Listen, God created you and He saved you. He created me and saved me to fight noble fights for the kingdom of God. And I think a lot of the reasons so many of us are bored, and I think a lot of the reasons that we spend so much time and energy venting pent-up anger on stupid, insignificant fights is because we haven't found a bean field that's worth a hill of beans, right? And so we spend all of the energy that God created, gave us to invoke the kingdom of God, to bring good things to planet Earth, and we waste all of our energy and time and our life fighting stupid fights. All right? Find your bean field and know the difference between beans and Philistines. I got it? Be like Shema. All right, here's the second point we learned from Shema about living lives of concern and responsiveness as opposed to lives of apathy and complacency. Find your bean field and then show up. Show up. Verse 12. The Israelite army fled. Everybody else took off, but Shema held his ground. Say, held his ground. Held his ground in the middle of the field. Shema found his bean field. He showed up in his bean field, and he held his ground in his bean field. And with the result, he made the book, right? God's book. A guy fighting in a bean field made God's book of heroes. Now listen to this. Heroic living is really that simple in God's book. It's really that simple. Find a bean field where you want to see the kingdom of God come to the brokenness of planet Earth and kick the devil's butt. Take a stand in that bean field and hold your ground. And hold your ground. Show up. Find your bean field and show up. Now here's a couple quick ancillary or secondary points of application about showing up that we learned from Shema. First, show up though you may not feel qualified. Let's read those two top lines together. Show up though you may not feel qualified. Where do I get that from? Two things here from verse 11. Next in rank, say next in rank. Next in rank means he was down in the ranks. Shema was down in the ranks, all right? This is not the gold medalist on the team, right? Shema was back in the pack. He was lower in the rank, and he was from Harar. Say Harar. Harar. Harar to you. Harar. Harar means like from the mountains. That's all it means. Back in the pack from the mountains. So listen to this. Shema was a third-rank hilljack. Shema was a third-rank hilljack. All right, and this third-rank hilljack became a hero in God's book because he found a bean field, he took a stand, and he brought the kingdom of God to a place where the enemy was oppressing planet Earth. And he made the book. All right? So show up even though you think you may not feel qualified. A lot of us do fail to show up. In many ways, we often fail to show up because we don't think we're qualified, all right? Shammah showed up. He took a stand not because, he was qualified to take a stand, not because he had the credentials behind his name, not because he had some great position of authority, not because he went to seminary, right? Not because he had degrees after his name. Shammah chose a bean field, he showed up, he took a stand, he brought the kingdom of God simply because he saw a place of brokenness in the human condition, and he said, not even here, not on my watch, kingdom of God come here. So find your bean field and show up, even though you think you're not qualified. God uses third-rank hilljacks. All right? A second quick ancillary application about showing up that we learned from Shammah. Show up even though it may mean standing alone, unnoticed, and unappreciated. Let's read all that together. Show up though it may mean standing alone, unnoticed, and appreciated. All right, the Philistines had gathered at whatever this place was and attacked the Israelites in a field full of beans, and the Israelite army fled. But Shammah held his ground. All right, so when the enemies of God picked a fight, all the rest of the team said, wow, would you look at the time? I'm so busy. I've got stuff to do. Right? Hey, listen, church, that's the way it is sometimes. That's the way it is sometimes. When you take a stand for something worth fighting for, you're going to find everybody else is, wow, look at the time. Right? And it can be exhausting, and it can be discouraging when you feel like you're showing up, you're holding your ground, and I'm doing it all by myself. But listen to this, you faithful soldiers. Listen to this. All right? It's actually in those times when we're standing alone that, our bean field and our calling to that bean field, the stand, our showing up is clarified and purified. Our call is clarified and purified. Because in those times of standing all alone, fighting for the kingdom of God, we discover a crystal clear answer to the question, who am I doing this for anyway? Who am I doing it for anyway? Whether you're standing in a bean field, whether you're changing a diaper in the nursery, whether you're mentoring an at-risk kid in the elementary school, whether you're making coffee, whether you're handing out bulletins, right? In those times when I feel like, man, nobody else is in this with me. I feel all alone. It's in those moments that God clarifies who we're doing it for anyway. Oh, but you don't understand, Kent. I'm falling all alone in this bean field. No one else helps. No one else even notices what I'm doing. Are we taking a stand for the kingdom of God to be noticed by other people? We're not. We're not. Oh, but Kent, you don't understand. I'm fighting all alone in this bean field, and nobody even appreciates everything I'm doing. Is that why we bring the kingdom of God to the brokenness of planet Earth? To get appreciated? No, hey, it's not a bad thing to want to be noticed. It's not a bad thing to want to be appreciated, and it's really kind of nice when we get those things. But ultimately, Shammah knew, first of all, he was never alone. The team left, but Shammah knew he was never alone. Shammah knew, hey, you know what? This bean field matters. It may not matter to everybody else, but it matters to me, and more importantly, it matters to God. And because it matters to God, it matters to me. And so Shema knew that no bean field stance, even if it seems insignificant as a bean field, is ever unnoticed. And it's never unappreciated. So it didn't matter to Shema that nobody else was doing anything. Shema took his stand for an audience of one. All right, so find your bean field. Show up for an audience of one. Even though you may not feel qualified, and even though it might mean standing alone, so to speak, unnoticed and appreciated. Yeah, I want to close just with this New Testament verse, so that you can see this idea of finding your bean field and showing up is not just some stupid idea that Kent came up with. Because he's right, I always say, because I'm bored, I have nothing better to do than to inflict things on you guys. This is the New Testament Christian life. 1 Peter 4:10. So God has shown you, and you means me, so say me. Yeah, God has shown me his grace in many different ways. He's brought the perfections of his kingdom to our lives in many different ways. So be good servants. Let's call that soldiers. Be good soldiers. Soldiers. Say soldiers. So be good soldiers and use whatever gift, whatever grace he has given you in a way that will best serve everybody else. Right? I think that verse says, find your bean field and show up with the grace that God has given you. Right? So just find a place. This is how you find your bean field. Just look for places in this house, in this community, in this country, in this planet where the devil's winning. All right? Or where certainly the kingdom of God isn't showing up in mercy and grace and compassion and healing and salvation. All right? So just find a place where you want the kingdom of God to come. All right? And this verse says, whatever grace God has given you, give it away. And so you might find that your bean field probably should best match the graces you've experienced in life. All right, so your bean field should match your design. It should match your ability. It should match your life experiences. It should match your passions. All right, so find a bean field. That bean field's probably going to look something like the graces God has invested in you. And listen, if you don't know your passion, if you don't know what you're passionate about, borrow somebody else's for a while. Just borrow. Hey, can I borrow your passion? It's like, can I borrow an emotion? Never mind. Can I borrow your passion? Until you find your own. And you might find, I'm passionate about this too. Or your passion will be clarified. And so listen, I'm gonna wrap up here. The sermon is shorter this morning because what we want to do is we want to provide an opportunity for the leaders of our Vineyard ministry teams, Team Vineyard, to tell you about the bean fields that they're fighting in, where they're bringing the kingdom of God. And we just want you to, consider these and say, all right, I could fight in that. I could take a stand. I could show up in that bean field, all right? That's what we're going to do. And so each is going to present their bean field, and then they're going to be back there to provide you an opportunity, and we're going to leave the opportunity in the footprint of the service, right? So as soon as we say go, don't leave, all right? Even though, your pot roast thingy is like going off, like service is done, ready to eat, service is done, we've got plenty of time. Your pot roast is still going to be there. All right, so check out the bean fields and find your bean field. Because listen, if you're a Christ follower and if you're a member of this house, if you're a part of this church family, this is a culture I would like to suggest we develop here. At any point in time, any one of us should be able to come up to another one of us and say, hey, where's your bean field? And we all have an answer. We all have a bean field that we've chosen to take a stand in, and we're showing up because we know broken things matter And we want to use the grace that God has given us to invoke the perfections of heaven and apply it to the brokenness of planet Earth.